What's going on, guys? It's Greg from East Coast Dies, and today we have another episode of Theory Thursday. So I've done a lot of theory on knots in the past and tutorials, so we took the time to redo all of our knot tutorials for you recently so they'd be more clear, easier to follow, and a lot of you guys are just joining the channel, could check them out and learn how to string all the knots. So you can check them out. They're on our channel. They're in a playlist called Tutorials. We have a detailed one for each different type of knot. So now I'm going to try and take those tutorials, try and put them into context, and kind of help you out figuring where and when you should use these different knots. So first, basic premise, the first four knots we're going to talk about, I generally use to pull the mesh at the top down tightly to lower sidewall holes to create a channel. It's going to pull the mesh down here, create a flat part, which is going to help you create that channel, which adds consistency and hold. So those four knots are the interlock, which is the most basic, the SI, the knot, and the knotted SI. So there's pretty much four that I generally use, and those are the main four. So the first one we're talking about is the interlock. So as you saw in the tutorial, this is the easiest one. It's the most basic. It's the one pretty much everyone learns first, and it was kind of around way before all these other more complicated knots became more prevalent. So it's a simple knot. It works really well for what you want it to do. It's going to pull the mesh down. The only issue here is over time, these tend to loosen up a little bit more. They tend to let the mesh come up a little bit, which can over time make your pocket change, which isn't ideal. That brings us to the knot, which is essentially an overhand knot. So this just adds one more loop into the knot. Same kind of pulling motion, but the main advantage of this is going to keep it a lot tighter. So by adding that extra loop, it makes the string grip onto itself, and it's going to stay way tighter over time. So this is probably my favorite out of the bunch, just because it's really going to allow the pocket and the channel and the tension to stay the same for as long as you're using the pocket. It won't, it's not going to bag out and it's not going to stretch out. That brings us into the two SI options. So an SI stands for special interlock. So essentially what you're doing is an interlock in the middle of the diamond. So you're not actually really locking the diamond down. You're actually putting a knot in the middle of the diamond, which is going to hold that diamond down. This is pretty similar to the interlock in that it can loosen up a little bit. It just tends to pull the mesh a tiny bit more to the outside because you're putting that outside piece of the mesh on the other side of the knot. So it can pull it just a little bit tighter and a little bit flatter, which is nice sometimes. And then the knotted SI is kind of the same idea on the flip side. Very similar pulling, very similar tension, but it's not going to loosen over time, but it is a little bit more complicated to string and learn. So when using these knots, generally to create a mid pocket, I'll pull 3 diamonds of mesh down as tightly as they can possibly go, and you can do this by skipping the sidewall holes you use, and I'll pull the 4th one just a little bit less tight to start to create that pocket. So usually we're going to pull the 4th diamond of mesh right into the middle of the stick and then start to bunch it up to create a mid pocket. If you're going lower, I would pull all 4 diamonds as tight as humanly possible, and then that's going to allow you to make a little bit of a lower pocket with a longer, more narrow channel. Now we have the knots that I usually use to develop a pocket. That's your 1s, your 2s, your stacked SI, and your SI, and sometimes a 3, but not very often. So a 1 is just going to be the single loop, 1 hole of mesh, and it's just going to start to create that depth. It obviously lets the mesh hang a lot looser than a knot or an interlock would, but it doesn't create too much depth. 1 is going to be able to move a little bit, so since it's not actually locked down to anything, it's just sitting on a string, it's able to shift up and down a little bit. So to create a pocket that's not going to move a ton, you want to bunch those 1s together so that the mesh diamond can't float too far on the sidewall. And that brings us up to a 2, which is just 2 1s stacked together between 2 knots. So that's going to bunch the mesh very tightly in one little area, which is going to create that definition, that pocket depth that you want. Again, to get optimal pocket depth and definition, I recommend that you don't put those very far apart, that you keep them on consecutive sidewall holes. So it's going to bunch them together and minimize lateral movement up and down the sidewall by having those knots to anchor it on either side. Now the stacked SI, which is essentially 2 SIs stacked right on top of each other on the same sidewall hole. It's a little complicated when you just look at one, but if you watch a tutorial, it breaks down pretty easily and you should be able to get it after a couple tries. So this is a very cool knot and one that people are using a lot more lately, and that's because it's really the only knot that allows you to put 2 diamonds of mesh in the same exact spot. So by doing that, you're going to maximize pocket definition, make sure it's not too baggy. You can keep a little bit more defined because that double up is going to be right on the same spot. You're going to create maximum definition right there where the 2 stack on top of each other. The other nice thing is that they're not able to shift at all. They're both locked down on top of each other. They're both locked down to the sidewall hole. So that means that the pocket's not going to be too shifty. If you're a person that likes your pocket to sit in one place, this knot could definitely be for you. And then just like the one, you can also use a single SI to create the rest of your pocket. Some people have been known to put them all the way down the sidewall. This works well if it's a head that has a lot of sidewall holes. You can essentially put them consecutive. They'll end up close together and end up bunching your pocket up very nicely. They lay flat, which is nice. They create a little less depth than a one. They're going to make a little bit shallower of a pocket because some of that diamond is on the outside of the sidewall. But what they do is flatten the mesh out just a little bit on the inside of the sidewall string, which makes it hug the ball actually a little bit more on the inside. Creates a little flat part of the mesh, which makes it just a tiny bit narrower. Seem pretty good? Mm-hmm. So there you have it, guys. Just some ideas to give you the conceptual framework about when you want to use these different knots as you're stringing to create different pocket preferences. When you have someone that likes a pocket that doesn't move a lot, moves a lot, has a lot of depth, a lot of definition, you can take those preferences, apply what you've learned here about the knots, and create different patterns to work for different players. So thanks for watching. Make sure to like this if you liked it. Let us know what you'd like to see in a Theory Thursday video in the future, and have a great day.